Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to yet another session of this Global Festival of Oneness celebrating Adi Shankaracharya Bhagavad-pada. Let me begin with a prayer. Vakratunda Mahakaya Koti Surya Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurme Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhatrakali Kapalini Durga Kshama Shiva Dhatri Swaha Swadha Namostute Ishvaro Guru Ratmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaya Shri Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Katismati Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram Sadashiva-Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hare Om. Namaste, good evening once again. Today we have a very special talk on Shankara and Svadharma, Acharya for the Ages, by Sri James Boag, who is joining us today from Czech Republic. Very warm welcome to you, James Ji. Thank you for making time for the session. We all look forward to your presentation. Before you begin, just a brief introduction. James is a yoga teacher who has been passionately sharing whole life yoga across 3 continents for the last 2 decades. He has been working with sound and song, movement and meditation, story and inquiry, practical philosophy, as well as the study of classical Sanskrita texts, especially the Yoga Darshana texts. James' programs invite nourishment and vitality to all parts of an individual, and it facilitates inquiry into the reality of being a human. With a background in language and literature, and having lived in many countries, James brings the perennial wisdom of Indic tradition to vivid life in the context of the contemporary world today. Again, a very warm welcome to you, James Ji. Thank you for making time. Please go ahead and start your session.
Thank you so much, Nitin. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here as part of this festival and to share some thoughts on this most inspiring great figure of Adi Shankaracharya. So to begin, I thought it would be appropriate to sing an invocation to Ganesha attributed to Adi Shankaracharya. So I'll sing the first 3 verses of a hymn that's often referred to as the Ganesha Stava, and a short invocation to the lineage of Shankaracharya that I'm going to speak about today. So as well as talking about Adi Shankaracharya, and as Nitin mentioned in the introduction, the idea of him being an Acharya for all of us, an Acharya for the ages, I will also speak about his 4 principal disciples as their stories were shared to me by my first teacher. So I'll get into that shortly, but first I'll just sing the invocation. And one thing about this invocation, this is to Ganesha, and the refrain is Parabrahma Rupam Ganesham Bhajema. So we worship that form of Ganesha that is beyond all form. And one of the things about Shankara's teachings and the teachings of the Yoga Darshana more broadly, I would suggest, is that they invite us to work very pragmatically in this realm of form and embodiment, with this gift of being an earthling on this beautiful blue-green planet, in this realm of matter and change, and work with its gifts to recognize the essence, that which is beyond form. Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramikam niranandamanandam advaita purnam Paranirgunanirvishesham niriham Parabrahmarupam Ganesham Bhajyamam Parabrahmarupam Ganesham Bhajyamam Gunatitamanam chiranandarupam chirabhasakam sarvagam jnanagamyam Munityamakasharupam parisham Parabrahmarupam ganesham bhajyaman Parabrahmarupam ganesham bhajyaman Jagatkaranam karanajnanarupam suradim sukadim ganesham ganesham Jagadvyapinam vishwavanyam suresham Parabrahmarupam ganesham bhajyaman Parabrahmarupam ganesham bhajyaman Parabrahmarupam ganesham bhajyaman Narayanam Padmabhuvam Vasishtam Shaktin Chatatputra Parasharancha Vyasanshakam Gaudaparam Mahantam Govinda Yogindra Shishyam Shri Shankaracharya Matasya Padma Paranjastamana Kanja Shishyam Tantotakam Vartika Kanamanyan Asmad Gurun Santatamanatosmi Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Bhararayanam Sutrabhasha Kritau Vande Bhagavanto Punah Punaha. So, with this feeling of gratitude to this beautiful lineage, I will share a little bit of how I first encountered Shankara. So, about a little more than 20 years ago now, in the early 2000s, I was living in Thailand, and my first encounter with Shankara was through my first meditation teacher, a man called Larry Small. And Larry was a direct student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and later of the great Kashmiri saint Swami Lakshmanju. And when I met Larry, it was really a life-changing experience. So he taught me to meditate, and he introduced me to teachings and practices of the Vedic, Indic, and Kashmiri Yoga Shaiva traditions. And I continued to study and practice. And I realized through Larry's teachings, and as I continued to practice, that so much of what I was experiencing and benefiting from was in significant part, due to the work of Adi Shankaracharya, who so extraordinarily had done this amazing body of work to help safeguard, affirm, and in some ways revive the Vedic tradition. Now, for sure, my access to the riches of yoga, they also owed a lot to Paramahansa Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, to Paramahansa Yogananda, to Brahmananda Saraswati and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, to Swami Lakshmanju. Later, I had the chance to study with luminaries of Ramanuja's Vishishta Advaita Vedanta lineage. So there's so many great masters. And the way that my teacher Larry used to talk about it, he said, all the great masters, they're all playing on the same team. And they all share the same aim, which is the upliftment of all of humanity. But nonetheless, amongst those great teachers, there's always something kind of outstanding about Adi Shankaracharya. Ever youthful, ever inspiring, and somehow always present. So I would say that I feel a certain runa towards this great teacher. And the way that I was taught in the Indic tradition, one honors one's runa, or one repays one's debts, for example, to one's ancestors by continuing the line, by providing our parents with grandchildren, and as far as we can, being better parents than they were. In other words, building on our inheritance. We can honor our runa to nature, to the environment, to this abundant earth that allows all this experience by leaving it in better shape and even perhaps more beautiful than we found it. So what then of our runa to our teachers? So if one becomes a teacher, one should also build on the inheritance and, as far as we can, teach even better than they did. Now, if our teacher was Adi Shankaracharya, that is possibly an extraordinarily high standard to reach. But fortunately, there's another way we can express our gratitude to our teachers, another way we can honor that runa. And that is, as best we can, as far as possible, to embody their teachings and embody their example. To do our best to learn from the embodied example that they gave us. So how can we do this? And what is Shankaracharya's example? Or at least, what do I understand by that? At least on my own terms, in my own life, my own sincere explorations. Does it mean that we are to walk the four directions? To re-establish temples and centers of Indic education? Does it mean that we have to do all we possibly can to understand the Vedic tradition so thoroughly that we can transmit its essence in ways that animate and invigorate all of humanity? Does it mean that we have to soak in the ecstasy of divine communion and then let our experience pour forth transcendental poetry that can inspire our descendants for centuries and millennia to come? Well, those are all wonderful aspirations. And as I suggested, Shankara, he set the bar very, very high. But, as I've also already mentioned, we can do what we can in our own authentic way. Now, Shankara setting the bar so high, sometimes when people hear about this great teacher and all that he accomplished in just a short period of time on the earth, sometimes people think, did he really do all of that? And just last year at the Mysore Yoga Utsava, this was last December, at the closing session, one young man, he sang a beautiful hymn, and it was a hymn that I'd never heard before. And afterwards I went to thank him and I asked him, was that your own composition? And he said, oh, no, that was from Shankara. Oh. So we continued chatting and I asked him, because this is something people have also asked me when I've shared some hymns from Shankara, like that one, the Ganesha Stava that I sang at the beginning. And I said, do you really think it was Shankara? Or was it perhaps somebody else who felt that the inspiration that had allowed them to compose or bring forth such a hymn, that was really beyond their egoic or ahankaric idea of themselves, and so they attributed it to the grace of Shankara? Because I've come across this idea that perhaps you have too. Some texts that are attributed to Vyasa or Shankara, they've been so attributed to help give them more credence, or perhaps to deflect away this idea of individual authorship. So this is so different from this modern idea of intellectual property. Rather, it's the idea by saying that it was Vyasa or Shankara who did it, it's like, I didn't write this. I was just fortunate to receive it from spirit, from the source, via the grace of the living tradition. And so I'll attribute it to a name that represents that, and which will also mean that no misleading false glory will come to me. And that can also potentially help guard against the truth that is lively and present in this living transmission of this hymn of spirit, its truth and its value being lost or diluted by being associated with one such as me, one limited human being with my foibles and downfalls and weaknesses and blind spots. And so I'd attribute it to a great master. And so I was sharing some of these ideas that people had, sometimes shared with me. And then this young man, this young Pandit, he said, because one thing I also said, and Shankara did so much, yeah? And then he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said words along these lines. He says, No, no, no. We marvel at Shankara's career from our limited viewpoint, from our perspective. So we see his tremendous output. We hear about the reach of his work, the distances he covered, the populations that he reached and touched and inspired, the different commentaries that he was able to share and compose, these hymns of praise that he shared and composed. And we can think, wow. But then it made me think of Shakespeare, who also wasn't around very long. And some people also say of him, was it really him who did it? And I think it's the same idea. We, in our blindness, plagued as we are by partiality and avidya, shackled, limited, held back by our fears, our inhibitions, our false beliefs, we can lose touch with the real depth of our essence and our real potential. Because what does Krishna tell us in the Gita? Yoga karma sukhaushalam. Yoga is skillfulness. Yoga is efficiency. When we become established in yoga, who knows with what efficiency, with what skill we'll be able to share, produce, create. Who knows what we'll be able to bring forth from that seat of centeredness in which we are attuned with the intelligence of the cosmos itself, when we become a conduit for the intelligence that holds all of life together and enables it all. So as an established yogin, Shankara was operating at what might be for us an awe-inspiring level. But according to the tradition, that is just the reality of operating from that state of oneness, that state of yoga, a state that we could perhaps also describe as oneness with Shankara, oneness with Shiva, oneness with the source, Shankara, the one that karas, that makes, that does, Sham, that which is auspicious, that which is harmonious. The idea in yoga, when we come into that attunement, we can become Dharma Megha. We can become like a rain cloud of Dharma, just as the cloud showers forth its blessings and allows all this abundance to come. If we are able to do our own work and come to that alignment, who knows what we might be able to bring forth. So anyway, this exchange with this young scholar, singer, devotee of Shankara, it had me thinking about the legacy of Shankara more broadly. And it made me think back to these amazing satsangs that I experienced with my teacher Larry. This was back in like 2003 and 4. And during these talks, they would be about 2 hours, and they would nearly always culminate with this captivating story. And Larry told us of many of the great masters, gurus, and acharyas of the tradition. My teacher Larry, when he was 15 years old, he grew up in the United States, but age 15, he knew he wanted to go and study with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he did. And from age 15 to 19, he spent his time, a lot of the time, at these programs that Mahesh Yogi was giving. So he was hearing about Vedic sciences all day long for a very significant part of his early life. And so he heard all these amazing stories from the living tradition. And Larry mentioned how Shankaracharya, he established these 4 seats or 4 centers of learning, and he left his 4 principal disciples in charge of each of them. And during the course of this satsang series that ran for about 8 months, Larry mentioned at various points stories of each of those 4 great acharyas. And they were all very memorable, at least the way that Larry recounted them to me, with full of devotion and flavor. So he told us of Padmapada. So Padmapada is one of these 4 great acharyas of the lineage associated with Shankaracharya. So I'm going to mention Padmapada, Hastamalaka, Suryeshwara, and Totaka. These four acharyas who established or became the first Shankaracharyas of these four seats that Shankara established. So Padmapada, his story is quite striking, as is his name. And the names are never incidental in Sanskrit. So Padmapada, the one who is lotus-footed. And how did he get this name? So the story goes, as it was told to me, is that one day Shankaracharya is at the far side of the river. It's quite a wide river. The river is raging. There are eddies and whirlpools. There are torrents. There are rapids. But on the other shore stands his disciple. And Shankara calls to him, asking him to cross the river, to come over to him. And it is said that Padmapada, without a moment's hesitation, without a moment of doubt, he starts walking across the water. And according to the story, with every step of his lotus feet, a huge supportive lotus leaf sprang up in front of him, creating, as it were, a bridge across the raging river, across the torrent. And Padmapada was able to arrive dry, fresh, at the feet of the master on the far shore. Now, when one first hears a story like this, it depends on one's predilections and one's background. But some people can hear a story like this and they think, walking on the, especially if they grew up in the West, for example, like I was born in England, and the first person I heard of walking on the water was the Christ Jesus. And in that story, they're out at sea with a group of fishermen, and their Lord and Master, they see him walking on the water, and he calls to them, "Come, join me." But they are all too fearful to step out of the boat onto the waves. Not so Padmapada. Padmapada. He is not touched by fear, bhaya, or doubt, sanshaya. He displays full shraddha, confidence and conviction. He displays full virya, valor, courage. And so he is able to do what the yoga practitioner is enjoined to do if we are to get to the far shore, which is to step through our fears, to go beyond the known, so we may bring forth and unveil that deeper essential nature. So this is not a fairy story, at least as I understand it. No, this is a Puranic story. What do I mean when I say a Puranic story? It is a story that is full of perennial truth. It is Pura, it is ancient, but it's ever fresh, and it's ever relevant. It's permanently relevant, perennially relevant. Now, some people hear this story and they say, yes, this symbolizes, this tells us of the perfect Guru-Shishya or Shishya-Guru relationship. The Guru calls and the Shishya answers without doubt, without hesitation. Certainly. But I think it's more than that. There's so many beautiful layers that we can perhaps dive into here. Yes, when he walks across the water, when he walks to his Guru, when he heeds his Guru's invitation without hesitation, Padmapada demonstrates, incarnates many of the qualities that certainly are helpful if one is to be a shishya, if one is to be a disciple. But in the Guru Gita, in the Skanda Purana, it is said, for example, that the Guru is really nothing other than the awakened conscience. And some great teachers who I have met, some of whom are considered gurus, have said things like, my job is to awaken you to that which is already alive inside you. So the Guru calls from the far side of the river. One way we might understand this is our conscience calls. Our conscience whispers to us. It murmurs a directive. Our soul longs to go back to the wholeness from which we have emerged. It longs for us to go beyond the limits that we have allowed to be placed on ourselves through our ahankaric attachments and associations. But our conscience is always calling, always guiding us. There is this pilot light of conscience inside. It never goes out. But will we allow ourselves to notice it? Will we allow ourselves to heed its promptings? Or will we be too caught up in the whirling eddies of our habits and their inertia, tamas? Or will we be too distracted by the rush, the rapids of our engrooved tendencies, rajas? This is how it often is in a human life, no? Rajas and tamas, we live in the realm of the gunas, they're always at play. But Padmapada shows us there is another possibility here in the realm of incarnation. Padmapada. We are human beings. We are bipeds. Pada, where does it stand in the group of 5 karmendriya? It stands in the center. We are the creatures who stand on 2 legs. We can join the energy of the vastness of the sky, akasha and space, and root it down into the support of the earth and become a conduit for the vitality, the water of life, and stoke the inner fire of conscience and spirit and breathe with the vayu of the life force. And this is actually how we move. We are the creatures that walk. And what does yoga ask us to do? It asks us to go forwards, to walk beyond the known. And so Padmapada, he has lotus feet. One thing I think we can understand is that if we have the courage, if we allow ourselves to be quiet enough, steady enough, to tune in to the inner guidance of our conscience, it will tell us where we need to walk to be able to unveil and access the grace that is really all around us. Every human movement is really a channeling of the energy of space from the earth through this body. How do we walk? We give to the earth and we recycle energy. Where does our energy come from? It comes from the sun, it comes from the earth. Just like the trees, that great guru of the tree. What do I mean by saying the guru is a tree? The tree is unapologetically itself. It draws on the nutrients of the earth, but really the tree is also made from the sky and the sunlight. And when the sunlight is channeled and drawn into the root system, and then the tree grows, it draws in the energy of the air, and it transforms that oxygen into carbon. It breathes in the carbon dioxide, it gives out the oxygen. And eventually, it distills the energy of the sun into a form that we can then harvest to illumine the hearth of our home. And I would suggest that we can do the same at the microcosmic level. When we work skillfully, disinhibitedly with the gifts of our conscience, then we can work with all our life experience in such a way that it can help illumine our path home to the recognition of our essence beyond our egoic or ahankaric attachments. But can we find the courage to walk in Dharma, to walk in the way that takes us beyond the fear, through the fear, beyond the known, into the greater vastness that we really are? Now, what does this take? When Padmapada walked across the water, he was fearless, he was resolved, he was committed. He demonstrated so many of these great qualities that the yoga tradition again and again emphasizes are essential for practice. But this story gives us Padmapada not just as a description of a great shishya, a great student or disciple, this is also a prescription. The story is reminding us, yes, let me cultivate my courage. Let me cultivate my resolve. Let me practice steadily, realistically, step by patient, steady step with good humor. Let me cultivate my own shraddha, my own virya, which will bring more smriti. When I walk that path of faithfulness and confidence and courageous conviction, when my conscience tells me to go in a certain direction, I actually heed it. What happens? I build up a memory bank. This path that demands courage, that can sometimes be intimidating, it is its own reward. And so the path then becomes this self-propelling path. So Padmapada, just like Shankara, taught by example, you might say. He is an exemplar of qualities we can work with on our own path. I'd like to mention the other teachers too. So I'll come now to Hastamalaka, the one who held the amla fruit in his hands. And I think his story is also very instructive. So, as it was told to me, Shankara was traveling in the region that is now North Karnataka. And in this region, there was a pious man known by the name Prabhakara, the one who illumines. And he's a pious man, and he hears the great Shankaracharya is going to be in town. And so Prabhakara thinks this is perhaps a great opportunity because he and his wife, they are quite devout people, but they've been troubled in recent years because they have a son, and the son seems to be in good physical health, but he barely speaks. He tends to keep to himself, doesn't show much interest in family affairs or in mingling with others. And the parents have come to think, this boy is, maybe he's a bit of an idiot, and they would love to, that he was more normal. So when Shankaracharya comes to town, they think, maybe this great Acharya can help us. And they live in North Karnataka, fertile land, and we will take gifts of fruit to the great Acharya, maybe he can help. And the idiot boy, they say, here, hold this in your hand, and they give him an amla fruit, one of those lovely light green Indian gooseberries. Quite sour, but full of sweet nutrition. Anyway, he's got this fruit in his hand. Father's got a whole cart full of fruits plucked from the land all around. And when Shankaracharya is receiving people, he goes to him and with a certain heavy-heartedness explains the concern that he and his wife have been feeling. Shankara, and then he offers him, he offers the fruits, and then he says to the boy, and you can give him give him your fruit. So the boy comes forward and he opens his hand, and there is the amla fruit. Shankara's heard what the parents have had to say, and so he turns to the boy and he says, well, who are you then, idiot? And the boy replies, in verses of perfect Sanskrit, words to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, it says, I am the immortal, I am the imperishable, I am the inviolable, I am that which dwells within and which is all around. I am that from which this body has sprung, and to which everything that is incarnate will return. I am Shiva. I am that. Soham, Shivoham. But you know that anyway, don't you? And then Shankara says to the parents, I think you can leave him with me. And so the boy joins Shankara and has the name Hastamalaka, the one who has in his hasta, his hand, the amlaka fruit. Now, again, the name is very significant. The amla fruit has many sacred connotations and associations in the Indic tradition. too many to mention here in the time we have today. But one of the stories that evokes the sacredness of the Amla fruit is that there was a time when Parvati, consort of Lord Shiva, wanted to express her devotion for Lord Vishnu. And simultaneously, Lakshmi, consort of Lord Vishnu, wanted to express her devotion to Shiva. And so Lakshmi is praising Shiva and Parvati is praising Vishnu. And it is said that Shiva and Vishnu were so moved by their devotion. They were moved to tears, and from those tears sprang the Amla fruit. Now, the Amla fruit, it's quite sour, but it's just packed with nutrition. And the boy's name was Hastamlaka, the one who held this fruit in his hand. So just like Padmapada, the lotus-footed one, can, I think, be seen as an icon of what we can become if we walk a path of honesty and sincerity. Similarly, Hastamlaka, he's reminding us, it's in our hands. Grace is all around if we but allow ourselves to open to it. We might forget it. It may go unrecognized. That's the play of the gunas, yeah? But it's also the case that sooner or later, we will come out of the folly of being subject to svapna, sleep and stupor, bhaya, fear, shoka and vishada, sorrow and dejection, and this feeling of inadequacy and mother and ahankara, and the feeling of false sense of I and pride and limitation. Sooner or later, we'll realize that being so attached to these limiting associations, it's not helping us. And as we come to this realization, the brilliance of our essence, that inner sweetness, will become more available. It will be less veiled by the stupor of tamas and the perturbations of rajas. When that revelation, that recognition starts to dawn, this may be a very bitter pill to swallow. On the one hand, we may feel a lot of joy that we are seeing things more clearly than before. But when we see things more clearly than before, and we realize all these years I've been blind to things that were right here in the palms of my own hands, that were within my own reach, if only I'd allowed myself to be open to it. When we come to the recognition, perhaps I've been deploying my energy in a misdirected way for years. I've been barking up the wrong trees all these decades. Is that easy to digest? Is that easy to swallow? No. But the effort is its own reward. The amla may be bitter to the inexperienced palate, but its purifying, vitalizing properties are nectarine indeed. And if we commit to the path of Shankara, by which I mean the path of cultivating harmony, then perhaps we too might come to that recognition of the Hastamlaka state. We'll no longer be trapped in the tamasic happiness that Krishna describes in the 18th chapter of the Gita, verse 39. It's those so-called pleasures that just begin and end with stupefaction, that just keep us dull. We'll no longer be rotating on the wheel of rajasic pleasures, those which are sweet at first taste, but turn by and by to poison. Instead, we may become more and more accustomed to that sattvika joy, the one which at first glance, at first taste, at first exposure can be bitter, but actually becomes nectarine, and from the experience of which is born and emerges and becomes stronger that sweet, clear state of recognition of our essence. That state of Ananda, beyond the pairs of opposites. And the name Hastamaka reminds us, the access to that is in our own hand. Karmani eva adhikarahate, as Krishna tells us in the Gita. It's up to you. Your life experience is your responsibility. And maybe we have the opportunity to come from this state of limitation and recognize, there is a sweetness that's available to me all the time if I make myself available to it. Coming then to the third of the four teachers, and then we'll come to Shankara. I might have to go a bit more quickly. So the third teacher, known as Sureshwara and Vartikakara, the great commentator. So, as it was told to me, Shankara was on a mission, and his mission was to reaffirm, to re-energize, revitalize the Vedic perspective, establish it on a sure footing so it would be able to withstand the challenges of these difficult times and be available for us all these centuries later. And Shankara knows that it will help his cause if he can, as it were, bring on board the most esteemed and established pundits of the day. And so he goes to the place of this top pundit, in whose residence are held debates and discussions. And Shankara goes, he's a young man, he just jumps the fence, walks right in with his shaven head, because he's a renunciate. And when he walks into the assembly, the older established pundit says to him, "From where comes this shaven head?" And Shankara turns to him and says, "Well, sir, it comes from the ineffable source, like everything else we see all around us." And from there, the debate begins. And this debate, it has a stake. Whoever prevails, whoever wins, will join the other, will become the disciple of the other. So if Shankara loses, he'll have to become a householder and take up residence in this locality and be one of the disciples of this great master. And if the established pundit does not prevail, he'll have to join Shankara. The debate begins. There's a big audience and they're all captivated because they both speak with such depth, such presence, such authority. But as the hours go by, it becomes clear that Shankara is gaining not just the upper hand, but there's no way for the one who was previously the top pundit to re-establish his grip on this proceedings. At which point, his wife steps in. She is also a great pundit. And she thinks she can save her husband and save her marriage and her home by posing Shankara a question about conjugal affairs, of which he has no experience. And Shankara says, "Good lady, I'm not in a position to be able to respond to your question right now, but would you grant me some time to investigate?" And she says, "Yeah, that's a fair request." So Shankara goes off with some of his disciples. He says, "I'm just going to have to leave my body for a while. So I'm just going to be here. My bodily form will be here. You just stay around, make sure nothing disturbs it. I'll go and do my research." And Shankara, with his yogic powers, he exits his own body and enters that of an ailing king who's kind of moving towards his final moments. The ailing king is revived. The king has a significant harem, and with the aid of the ladies of the harem, Shankara is able to conduct the necessary research, find out what he needs to find out, to be able to answer the questions posed by the pundit's wife. He returns, he prevails in the debate, and they become his disciples. And this man comes to be known as Vartikakara, the great commentator, and he compiles many of Shankara's teachings. Now, there's a lot one could say here, and I've rushed through this one because I need to get to the last one and to Shankara himself. But one thing I think is so beautiful in this story and I missed out certain details, and some of you may be thinking, oh, but for the sake of our topic today, that's a choice I've made, so please forgive me if I've not done justice to the richness of this amazing story and the figures involved. But one key idea, I think, is that if we're going to practice, if we're going to advance along this path of yoga, we have to be ready to have our most deeply held beliefs challenged and opened up. We have to have our blindnesses, our blind spots exposed, our ideas renovated, and our attachments dissolved by exposure to something vaster. Now, the name of the Vartikakara, the great commentator, is also known as Sureshwara, the Lord of the Suras. Now, Suras can refer to the light beings, but they can also refer, like Devata, to the Indriyaha, to the instrumental powers of sensing and doing and acting. And I think is this not the case? That when we bring ourselves into that state of togetherness, we can experience something so rich that it facilitates this loosening our grip on so many of our attachments. And when we loosen our grip on the agglomeration of all our attachments, all our egoic, ahankaric associations, ideas, false beliefs, and at the same time stay present and alert, I think we can actually then drink deeper from the cup of life. And this to me is the real, or one of the meanings of aparigraha. I'm not grasping, but I'm present. So I can savor the real juice, the real essence of life, because I'm not blocking myself to it because of all these veiling associations and these veiling false beliefs. Still, old habits do run deep, including those of our attachment to our intellectual prowess, which brings us to the fourth of the great Acharyas who Shankara put in those 4 seats to continue his work after he left. So we've had Padmapada, the lotus-footed, walking on the water God-man. We've had Hastamalaka, who holds the nectar of the Veda in the palms of his hands as easily as he would hold an amma fruit. A boy so gifted that the ordinary people, his parents, thought he was stupid because his level of insight was so far beyond what they could see or understand. And we've had Sureshwara and his wife, human beings of extraordinary intellect and refinement, of great erudition, of great learning, and also great humility and many wonderful qualities, as was demonstrated through the way they conducted themselves in that whole episode, which we rather rushed through in the previous story. But there's a fourth student who becomes one of the great acharyas. Now, in Shankara's entourage, everybody has their duties. Vartikakara, he's the one who takes the notes, who compiles things, who distills things. This morning, Shankara's about to give his morning discourse. People have done their various tasks. Vartikakara's there, ready. Everybody's ready and waiting. But Shankara's waiting too, because it's not quite everybody. One student, one disciple, is not yet back from his morning chores. And this is a boy who is called Giri. Giri, which means, amongst other things, mountain. And Giri, some of the other disciples, they don't think so highly of him. His job is washing the pots and pans. So it's been breakfast, he's washed the pots and pans, he washes the dhotis. Some of the other disciples, they think he's not the brightest spark, not the sharpest tool in the kit, as it were. And Giri, his chore is to go down to the river and do the washing. Somebody has to do it. It's an important job. And Giri has always demonstrated tremendous devotion. He does his tasks very thoroughly, joyfully. He inhabits the spirit of service very beautifully. And all the other disciples, even if they sometimes think he's a bit slow intellectually, they cannot deny he does have a beautiful singing voice. And when he goes down to the river, he sings as he washes. And it so happened that in one of the local villages, there's a wonderful, wonderfully accomplished singing master, a woman, and she takes him on as her student. And when he finishes his washing, he goes and sings with her. Anyway, this morning, he hasn't come back in time for the morning discourse. And some of the disciples, they can tell why Shankara, he's waiting for that dollar, he's waiting for Giri, who, he doesn't understand it anyway, does he? I mean, come on. And they all want Shankara to start. Padmapada, Hastamlaka, they are their usual imperturbable selves. But Vartikakara, he can see, the people are getting agitated. And so he speaks up and he says, and it so happens that just by his side, there's a pile of stones, like a little mountain, a little giri. And Vartikakara says, "Sir, these stones making up this little giri, they are ready and waiting, just like the rest of us. Pray, sir, begin. They will understand your discourse just as well as our boy Giri." And Shankara says, "Our boy Giri? See, there he comes. Let's see what he has to say." Now, it so turns out that Shankara had wanted to teach some of his disciples a lesson about pride. And he also wanted to reward the devotion of Giri. And so that day at the river, he arranged that as Giri was washing the pots and the dhotis and singing, he would not be visited by his singing teacher. She would extraordinarily be absent. And instead, the boy Giri would be visited by an extraordinary grace. And Shankara gave him this downpour of revelation. And Giri, maybe before he was a bit slow, becomes, as it were, enlightened. And the spirit of recognition pulsates through his very being. So the students come back, so the boy comes back and the students are waiting, and Shankara says, "Let's see what he has to say." And Shankara says, they were wondering where you were. And then what does Giri do? He just launches into these 8 verses that later on came to be called the Totakashtakam, because his name then became Totaka. Vidita kila shastra sudha chaladi mahitopanishad katithartanidhi Shirayi karayi vimalam sharanam Bhava Shankara deshikami sharanam Karuna karunalaya palayamam Bhava sagara dukkha viduna hridam Rachaya kira darshana tattva vidam Bhava Shankara deshikami sharanam Bhavata janata suhita bhavita Nija bhoda vicharana charamati Karaishwara jiva viveka vidam Bhava Shankara deshikami sharanam Bhava eva bhavaniti miniratam Samajayata cetasi kautukitam Mama varaya mohamahajaladim Bhava Shankara deshikami sharanam Sukrite tikrite bahudha bhavato Bhavita samadarshana lalasata Atidinamimam pariparayamam Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam Jagatim Avitum Karita Kritayo Vicharanti Mahama Satcharatam Ahimam Shurivatra Vibhasi Guru Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam Guru Pungava Pungava Kirtanati Samatamayatam Nahi Kopi Sudhi Sharanagata Vatsara Tattvanidhi Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam Viditanamaya Vishadaika Kala Nacha Kinshana Kanchana Masti Guru Pritamiva Videhi Kripam Sahajam Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam Bhava Shankara Deshikami Sharanam. And after that, the previously murmuring disciples, they were in awestruck silence. And then Giri was no longer considered anything other than a great luminary. And he was left in charge of the Mutt in the north. So we've heard now of these four great preceptors that followed Adi Shankaracharya. But I think I can still go for 5 minutes. Is that okay? I'm going to overrun by just a few minutes. So we need to speak about Shankara himself, yeah? So I would like to address what I consider a misperception or misconception, because sometimes people say, oh, Shankara's okay if you're a renunciate, if you're a celibate, if you're a monk. It's okay for ascetics and ashramites and schoolboys, but I'm a worldly person, so Shankara, no, I'm not so interested. I don't think that's a valid statement or valid attitude. And that's why I've suggested that Shankara really is an Acharya for the ages. Now, going back to that anecdote about Mysore Yoga Utsava, and I talked about how Shankara did so much, yeah? He walked all over Bharatavarsha. He established these seats of learnings. He revived the Indic tradition. How did he do it? Karma Sukhaushalam. He did it because he was living skillfulness in action. Why? Because he was doing his dharma. And for me, this is one of the most essential teachings of Shankaracharya. He is demonstrating through his work, through his example, something that we can seek to emulate in our own way. It doesn't mean we have to do the exact same things that he did, but can we also incarnate our dharma? As Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 35, Shreyan svadharmo vigunav paradharmat svanushtithat. Svadharminidhanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayavaha. Much better to do your own dharma, even in a mediocre way, than to excel in the dharma of another. Because the dharma of another is fraught with fear. And of course, this verse is echoed in chapter 18. But this idea, Shankara, he was doing his dharma. That's how and why he was able to do so much in a short time. When he did his dharma, it brought him into accord with the Upanishadic reality of Satya Rita Brihat. Satya incarnating his authentic presence, sharing his innate unique gifts with disinhibited generosity. He was able to live Rita in rhythm and harmony with the intelligence of life itself, with the intelligence of the cosmos, and so bring forth the Brihat, the vastness that he really was. And so in this way, I think he is really an icon or an archetype that each of us can aspire to emulate in our own simple ways. What am I called to? Some of us may be more drawn to a path of asceticism, others more a path of devotion, some to work in the world. But as Krishna says also in the Gita, tapasvibhyo reko yogi, jnanibhyopi matodikaha, karmibhyashchariko yogi, tasmat yogi bhavarjuna. Arjuna, the yogin is greater even than the tapasvin. The yoga excels even the one established in knowledge. The yogi surpasses even the one who has done that amazing task of transforming their actions into karma yoga. Be a yogi, Arjuna. Be like Shankara. To me, this is what Shankara symbolizes. We may not walk the four corners of Bharatavarsha. We may not leave texts and poems, but if we can muster the courage, the fearlessness, the resolve, the steadiness to shake off the burden of our limiting sense of self, to shed the veils of our limiting beliefs, then we too can Shankara. We can do that which is Shams, that which brings harmony, that which allows us to reside in the sweetness of our true essence and share that which does contribute to Loka Sangraha, the wellness and cohesion of the whole. So to me, the message of Shankara, just like the Bhagavad Gita, one of the texts that he commentated on, is not just for those who renounce, it's not just for the forest dweller or the monk. No. The teachings of yoga, they're for anybody who's interested. And if we're a householder, they can guide and steady us just as much as the person who lives away from society. And Shankara may have been a monk, but he was authentically so. He was one of those few human beings for whom that was the authentic path. But walking his authentic path, he shows us the way home to recognizing the unique glory of our true self. Jai Shiva Shankara. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Nitin, and everybody, Indica, for inviting me. And I hope that what I shared of the inspiration that's come to me from Shankara has also brought something of utility for you. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James Ji. It was a really, really fascinating, very mesmerizing, I would say. I think the right term is mesmerizing session with both intellectual rigor as well as what we call as ruchi for the heart, the taste for the heart, the gladness for the heart. Thank you for doing this very, very amazing session. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Nitin.
Yeah. Yes, we have many more such interesting sessions coming up. Tomorrow morning, we have a talk by Swami Japasiddhananda ji, and he will be speaking on philosophical underpinnings of Hindu values in Shankara's commentaries. Another interesting talk. Join us tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And once again, thank you, James Ji, for doing this wonderful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With this, we conclude the session. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.